The year was 1776, and the air across Europe was thick with revolution, secrecy, and whispers of hidden power. While the world remembers this year for the Declaration of Independence across the Atlantic, in the heart of Bavaria something far more shadowed and enigmatic was quietly taking shape. A society born in secrecy, cloaked in ritual, and spoken of only in hushed tones. Its name would echo through centuries, not merely as a footnote in history, but as the very foundation of countless conspiracies, the Illuminati. Even today, the mere mention of this name provokes unease, fascination, and suspicion, as if the organization had never truly disappeared but instead slipped behind the veil of our everyday lives. The power of this myth rests not just in what they did, but in what people believed they could do. In the candlelit halls of Bavaria's universities and the clandestine corners of smoky taverns, a small group of men met with a shared purpose: to question, to challenge, and to dismantle the chains of superstition and oppression that bound society. But where history often paints reformers as noble visionaries, the Illuminati would come to be seen as something darker, more dangerous. Were they enlightened thinkers who sought to free humanity, or were they the architects of a secret agenda to manipulate and control? The answer is tangled, shrouded in centuries of secrecy, half-truths, and deliberate deception. This story is not just about Bavaria or its restless intellectuals. It is about the human fascination with shadow power. For millennia, people have believed in hidden hands pulling the strings of empires, kings, and revolutions. The Illuminati, whether real or imagined, became the perfect embodiment of that fear. To their enemies, they were godless heretics plotting to topple church and crown. To their sympathizers, they were rebels against tyranny, forging a new world of reason and equality. Somewhere in between lies the truth, and like all truths hidden beneath layers of myth, it is far stranger than fiction. Imagine the late 18th century, a Europe carved by monarchs and controlled by religious authority. Peasants worked under crushing taxes, the church dictated belief, and the faint sparks of Enlightenment thought promised both liberation and chaos. Amid this fragile balance, a professor in Ingolstadt dreamed of something radical. His vision was not merely to spread reason but to craft a network, a secret fraternity with the power to influence governments and guide societies from the shadows. With whispered oaths and coded rituals, this dream would materialize into the Order of the Illuminati, a brotherhood that claimed noble aims but stirred whispers of a darker ambition. From the very beginning, secrecy was its greatest weapon. Members swore loyalty to the order above all else, surrendering individuality for the promise of a higher cause. Their identities were hidden beneath code names, their gatherings disguised within the halls of Masonic lodges. To outsiders, they were just another group of idealists, but behind closed doors they plotted strategies to infiltrate power, to recruit the influential, and to shape the minds of future leaders. This was not merely a fraternity of thinkers. It was a machine of influence, and even in its infancy, it radiated unease. Why does this shadow still linger? Why, centuries later, do we still speak of the Illuminati as if they never vanished? Perhaps it is because they tapped into something eternal, the fear that those who truly rule us are not the kings and presidents we see, but faceless men in hidden rooms. Their story has become the template for every modern conspiracy theory: secret meetings, coded symbols, and unseen agendas. From revolutions to world wars, from assassinations to financial collapses, the Illuminati are accused of standing silently in the background, always watching, always pulling strings. This investigation begins not with the outlandish claims of pop culture or internet lore, but with the historical roots of a society founded in 1776 Bavaria. We peel back layers of history to reveal who these men were, what they wanted, and why their order still casts a shadow across centuries. The truth may be stranger, darker, and far more unsettling than the myths it inspired. For if the Illuminati truly sought to liberate humanity, why then do their whispers still feel like chains? And if they were destroyed, why do their shadows stretch so far into our present day? As we descend into this story, prepare for a journey through history's most infamous secret society, a tale of ambition and secrecy, of light wrapped in darkness, and of a brotherhood whose name alone has become synonymous with hidden power. In 1776, revolutions were born in the open, but in Bavaria, another was born in silence, destined to haunt the world forever. Bavaria in the year 1776 was a land caught between the weight of tradition and the tremors of a new age that threatened to tear the old order apart. Nestled in the southern part of what we now know as Germany, Bavaria was ruled by Elector Karl Theodor, a monarch whose reign embodied both conservatism and caution. His Bavaria was deeply Catholic, loyal to Rome, and resistant to the rising tide of Enlightenment ideas that was sweeping through Europe like wildfire. The Church's influence was absolute. Its authority stretched from the pulpit to the universities, dictating not only religious practice but the boundaries of thought itself. To live in Bavaria at this time was to breathe under the watchful gaze of the clergy, where faith and obedience were not merely virtues but obligations. Yet beneath this rigid facade, a storm was building. Across Europe, the Enlightenment had taken root, its ideas spreading like sparks carried on the wind. Philosophers such as Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu were challenging the legitimacy of monarchs and the dogma of organized religion. They preached reason over superstition, knowledge over blind obedience, liberty over servitude. In salons, taverns, and universities, their words ignited debate, inspiring men and women to question the old ways. In France, these ideas threatened to topple kings. In America, they had already planted the seeds of revolution. And in Bavaria, though the Church sought to suppress them, these dangerous thoughts found fertile ground among restless scholars and ambitious young minds. The contrast was stark. On one hand, Bavaria presented itself as a bastion of Catholic orthodoxy, a land where priests held sway over both hearts and laws. On the other, whispers of forbidden texts and radical philosophies were seeping through its walls. Books banned by the Church circulated in secret. Young men at the University of Ingolstadt, where Adam Weishaupt taught, devoured writings that questioned the very foundation of monarchy and faith. It was a kingdom trying to preserve its traditions, yet at the same time, it stood vulnerable to the intellectual firestorm raging beyond its borders. To understand why the Illuminati was born here, one must understand the suffocating weight of Bavarian society in 1776. The rigid class system left little room for mobility. Aristocrats wielded privilege, peasants struggled under crushing taxes, and the middle classes, though growing, were frustrated by limitations placed upon them. Education was tightly controlled, often in the hands of Jesuits who ensured that religious orthodoxy prevailed. Independent thought was discouraged, and deviation from church teachings could mean social ruin or worse. For the young and the ambitious, the desire for knowledge, progress, and freedom often clashed with the iron grip of authority. This collision of repression and aspiration created the perfect breeding ground for rebellion, not in the form of open war, but in the form of secret societies, where radical ideas could be nurtured away from the prying eyes of church and state. Meanwhile, the wider world was changing with dizzying speed. Across the Atlantic, the American colonies had declared their independence from Britain in that same year, 1776, sending shockwaves through Europe. The idea that ordinary men could rise against monarchy and create a new nation founded on liberty and equality was electrifying. In Paris and London, revolutionary thinkers debated feverishly. Monarchs and clergy alike felt the tremors of fear. If rebellion could happen in America, what would stop it from spreading to Europe? For Bavaria, these developments were not distant curiosities. They were looming threats. If Enlightenment thought and revolutionary zeal were not controlled, they could undermine the very foundations of Bavarian rule. The paranoia of rulers only fueled the hunger for subversion. Secret societies flourished across Europe during this time. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other brotherhoods offered men a place to share ideas that could not be spoken openly. These groups promised mystery, fraternity, and influence. In Bavaria, such societies attracted intellectuals, nobles, and restless students, providing a veil of secrecy under which dangerous discussions could unfold. But even these societies, steeped in ritual and hierarchy, were not enough for some. Adam Weishaupt, watching from his post at the University of Ingolstadt, believed that Freemasonry was too elitist, too complacent. He envisioned something more radical, more disciplined, a society not just for debate, but for action. Thus, the Bavaria of 1776 was both a crucible and a cage. A crucible because the collision of enlightenment and oppression forged minds that longed for transformation. A cage because the walls of monarchy and church left no space for open rebellion. Out of this tension, something unique was bound to emerge. The Illuminati was not an accident of history but the direct product of its environment. Had Bavaria been more tolerant, perhaps Weishaupt's dream would have remained an academic curiosity. But under the weight of suppression, his ideas transformed into a clandestine mission, one that could only exist in the shadows. As the rest of Europe braced for revolution, Bavaria's rulers clung tightly to tradition, fearing that any crack in their authority would unleash chaos. Yet the very act of suppression bred the thing they feared most. In the silence of locked rooms and behind closed doors, men began to gather, whispering of reason, equality, and freedom. They dreamed of a new order, but to dream openly was dangerous. In 1776 Bavaria, To question was rebellion, and to rebel was to risk everything. And so rebellion chose the only path available: secrecy. This was the world in which the Illuminati would take shape, a world torn between the authority of the past and the promise of the future, between the weight of faith and the fire of reason. Bavaria was not merely the backdrop of this story. It was the perfect storm, the very soil from which the shadow of the Illuminati would rise. What began in whispers would grow into one of history's most enduring myths, a name that still sends chills down the spine centuries later. But in 1776, it was simply the desperate birth of an idea, forged in secrecy, destined to haunt the world. Adam Weishaupt's story begins not in the shadows of conspiracy, but in the quiet life of a boy raised under the weight of authority and faith. Born in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, on February 6, 1748, Weishaupt entered a world tightly gripped by Catholic power. His father, a law professor, died when Adam was just 5 years old, leaving the boy in the care of relatives who ensured that his upbringing remained firmly within the Jesuit fold. The Jesuits, an order of Catholic priests renowned for their intellectual rigor and absolute loyalty to the Church, mold young minds with discipline, strict education, and an unwavering devotion to authority. For Weishaupt, this education created both brilliance and resentment. While he absorbed the logic and order of Jesuit instruction, he also bristled under its rigidity. In the very institutions meant to shape his loyalty, seeds of rebellion began to take root. From a young age, Weishaupt displayed a voracious intellect. He devoured books, moving beyond the confines of official texts to explore forbidden works of philosophy, science, and political thought. Enlightenment ideas fascinated him. The writings of Voltaire, Montesquieu, and Rousseau spoke to him with an almost personal urgency. Here were thinkers who dared to question monarchy, who ridiculed superstition, and who argued that human beings could govern themselves through reason. To the Jesuits, these writings were heresy. To Weishaupt, they were revelation. He began to imagine a society not ruled by clergy or kings, but by rational men, liberated from chains of ignorance and oppression. Yet he also saw how dangerous these ideas were in a place like Bavaria. To speak them openly was to invite ruin. If such a vision were to survive, it would have to live in secrecy. By the time Weishaupt reached adulthood, his talents were undeniable. In 1772, at only 24 years old, he became a professor of law at the University of Ingolstadt, the first non-Jesuit to hold such a position in the faculty's history. This was no small feat for centuries. The Jesuits had dominated the university, shaping not only its curriculum but the very minds of its students. Weishaupt's appointment symbolized a subtle shift, a crack in the Jesuits' grip. But for Weishaupt himself, it also marked the beginning of his lifelong struggle. He was now a man of authority within a system he despised. His lectures on natural and canon law often carried the hidden imprint of his radical leanings, cloaked carefully in the language of academia. Students were drawn to his intellect, but beneath the surface, his frustration grew. The university, though prestigious, remained chained to dogma. Bavaria, though proud, remained shackled to superstition. It was in these years that Weishaupt's vision began to crystallize. He studied not only philosophy but the growing popularity of secret societies across Europe. Freemasonry, in particular, fascinated him. Masonic lodges provided havens for discussion, where men of influence debated science, politics, and reform under a veil of ritual and fraternity. But to Weishaupt, Masonry had become stagnant, elitist gatherings of nobles indulging in ceremony without genuine commitment to change. He wanted more than talk. He wanted action. A society that would move beyond symbolic gestures, a brotherhood that would infiltrate the very structures of power and steer them toward reason. If Freemasonry was an imitation of mystery, his order would be a machine of influence. Weishaupt's own personality lent itself to secrecy. He was ambitious, disciplined, and calculating. He knew that revolution could not be won in the streets of Bavaria. It had to be planted in the minds of the powerful. His concept was as radical as it was dangerous. Create a secret order dedicated to Enlightenment principles, train its members in loyalty and obedience, and place them strategically in positions where they could steer society from within. This was not a rebellion of arms but of influence, a quiet war fought in shadows. By 1776, his frustration with the existing order had reached its breaking point. He resolved to act, to create what would become the Bavarian Illuminati. Yet to paint Weishaupt as a simple rebel would be to miss the complexity of his character. He was not merely a dreamer chasing ideals of freedom and equality. He was also a manipulator, a strategist who believed that the masses were too ignorant to govern themselves. In his mind, humanity needed guidance, not from kings or priests, but from enlightened men who could lead from the shadows. His writings reveal a cold pragmatism. He envisioned a network in which members surrendered their individuality for the good of the cause, where secrecy was absolute, and where hierarchy ensured control. To join his order was not simply to share ideas, but to submit to a greater power, his power. It is here that the paradox of Adam Weishaupt emerges. On one hand, he was a visionary, driven by ideals of reason, liberty, and progress. On the other, he embodied the very authoritarianism he despised, crafting a system that demanded obedience and secrecy. He loathed the Jesuits, yet he borrowed their methods of discipline and indoctrination. He despised the church, yet he founded his order with rituals and symbols designed to inspire awe and devotion. In fighting one form of control, he created another. This duality would come to define both him and the Illuminati itself, an organization that claimed to liberate, yet thrived in manipulation and secrecy. By the time the Illuminati officially took form in May of 1776, Weishaupt was no longer just a professor, he was an architect of shadows. He recruited carefully, choosing men who were young, ambitious, and eager for knowledge. He gave them code names drawn from classical antiquity. He himself became Spartacus. He wrote initiation rituals, designed ranks, and crafted a system of symbols that concealed deeper truths. In public, he remained the respectable professor. In private, he was building an invisible empire. Those who joined often saw him as a mentor, a guiding intellect who promised them not only knowledge but purpose. But even in these early days, cracks appeared in his vision. Weishaupt's tendency to dominate alienated some of his recruits. His insistence on secrecy and absolute loyalty bred suspicion. His ambition to infiltrate power made others question whether the order's ideals of equality were truly sincere. Yet despite these tensions, the Illuminati grew, fueled by the charisma and relentless drive of its founder. For Weishaupt, each new member was a step closer to reshaping Bavaria, then Europe, and perhaps even the world. Adam Weishaupt's life is the story of a man caught between light and darkness, between ideals and obsession. His brilliance cannot be denied, nor can his flaws. He was both liberator and controller, visionary and manipulator, teacher and tyrant. And it was this complexity that gave birth to a society that would become more myth than reality, more feared than understood. In 1776, as he signed the first oaths of the Illuminati, he may have believed he was lighting a torch of reason. But in truth, he was also casting a shadow, one that would stretch across centuries. On the first day of May in 1776, while the world across the Atlantic celebrated revolution with declarations of independence, another revolution was born in silence, in secrecy, in the cloistered halls of Bavaria. It was on this spring day that Adam Weishaupt formally founded the Order of the Illuminati, a brotherhood unlike any other, one that sought not merely to question authority but to infiltrate it, to dismantle superstition and monarchy from within, and to guide the course of human history from the shadows. The date itself carried meaning. May 1st was a day steeped in ancient symbolism, a festival of renewal and fertility in pagan traditions, and later a day of labor, protest, and uprising. Whether by design or chance, the timing of the Illuminati's birth gave the order an aura of destiny, as if it were tied to cycles older and darker than the Enlightenment alone. The founding was modest. Weishaupt did not summon crowds or raise banners. Instead, he gathered a handful of trusted students and confidants, men bound by curiosity, restlessness, and ambition. In a quiet room in Ingolstadt, the first oaths were sworn. These men pledged secrecy and loyalty, vowing to protect the order even at the cost of their lives. Weishaupt christened himself Spartacus, evoking the slave who once led a revolt against the Roman Empire, a name that symbolized rebellion against tyranny. His followers were given classical aliases as well, reinforcing the idea that they were heirs to a secret legacy stretching back to antiquity. To outsiders, they were simply students or professionals. But within the order, they were initiates in a plan to reshape the world. The structure of the Illuminati was carefully crafted. At its core lay absolute secrecy. Members were to reveal nothing of the order's existence to outsiders. Identities were hidden behind code names, communication cloaked in cipher, and meetings conducted in darkness or behind closed doors. Weishaupt designed the group as a hierarchy, with degrees of initiation that mirrored, and in some ways mocked, the rituals of Freemasonry. Novices began at the bottom, subjected to tests of loyalty and obedience, while higher degrees promised deeper knowledge and influence. Yet this ascent was never straightforward. Information was withheld, members were monitored, and suspicion was encouraged. It was a society built not only on ideals of reason but on manipulation and control. The rituals themselves were a blend of Enlightenment philosophy and symbolic mysticism. A novice might be blindfolded during initiation, guided into a chamber where he swore oaths before being told of the order's mission. These oaths were not vague promises. They were binding contracts, demanding sacrifice and silence. Members were instructed to view themselves as soldiers in a war against superstition and tyranny, a war that would be fought not with swords but with ideas, influence, and infiltration. To reinforce loyalty, Weishaupt instilled the belief that the order held secret truths that would only be revealed to those who proved worthy. In reality, much of this knowledge was carefully rationed, designed to keep initiates hungry, obedient, and eager to rise. At its inception, the order's stated goals appeared noble. The Illuminati sought to abolish superstition, combat religious oppression, and promote equality and reason. They dreamed of a society where rulers governed by rational law, not divine right, where the church no longer chained thought, where humanity, freed from ignorance, could flourish. Yet beneath these ideals lurked darker undertones. Weishaupt believed that such liberation could only come through control. The masses, in his view, were incapable of guiding themselves. They required enlightened men, his men, to steer them. This tension between proclaimed ideals and hidden authoritarianism would shape the order's destiny. Recruitment in those first months was cautious, almost surgical. Weishaupt targeted men who were intelligent, ambitious, and dissatisfied with the status quo. Students at the University of Ingolstadt provided fertile ground. Young minds, already exposed to whispers of Enlightenment thought, were eager for purpose. Some saw in Weishaupt a mentor who promised both knowledge and belonging. Others were drawn by the thrill of secrecy, the allure of a hidden fraternity where they could feel powerful in a society that left them voiceless. Each new member swore loyalty not only to the ideals of reason but to the order itself, an allegiance that often blurred the line between liberation and submission. The organization's secrecy gave it strength. In a land where open rebellion against church or crown was unthinkable, the Illuminati thrived in darkness. Members could meet in taverns, libraries, or private rooms without arousing suspicion, their discussions cloaked in coded language and veiled gestures. They borrowed from the Freemasons, embedding themselves in existing lodges where their presence could be mistaken for nothing more than another circle of ritualists. But unlike the Masons, whose gatherings often centered on symbolic gestures, the Illuminati viewed these lodges as vehicles for influence. Their aim was not fraternity for its own sake, but infiltration, seeding men of their order into networks of power. This strategy of infiltration reflected Weishaupt's genius. He understood that small groups, carefully placed, could exert more influence than armies. A nobleman sympathetic to their cause might influence laws. A professor could shape generations of students. A clergyman, if persuaded, could quietly undermine the very church that opposed them. Through such placements, the Illuminati's reach extended far beyond its modest numbers. Each initiate was a hidden weapon, positioned to erode authority from within. But secrecy bred paranoia. Even in its infancy, the order was haunted by suspicion. Members were encouraged to monitor one another, to report disloyalty or doubt. Weishaupt himself demanded reports on his followers, reading their confessions and critiques with cold calculation. What he built was not merely a society of reason, but a network of control, a hidden state within the state. To the faithful, this was discipline. To the wary, it was tyranny under a different mask. The birth of the Illuminati on May 1, 1776, may have seemed insignificant at the time, a handful of men swearing oaths in a Bavarian room. Yet it marked the beginning of something that would echo for centuries. From those first rituals emerged a society that grew rapidly, spreading through Bavaria and into neighboring lands. From those early oaths would arise rumors of a hidden hand guiding revolutions, wars, and governments. The order's secrecy ensured that fact and fiction became indistinguishable, that history and myth fused into one. What is undeniable is that in that spring of 1776, Adam Weishaupt lit a fire he could never control. He envisioned himself as Spartacus, liberator of the oppressed, destroyer of tyranny. But in creating the Illuminati, he unleashed a shadow that would haunt not only his own lifetime but centuries beyond. The Order's founding was not simply the creation of another secret society. It was the birth of a legend, one that would come to symbolize the eternal fear that unseen hands shaped the fate of the world. The Order of the Illuminati, though born in secrecy on that May Day of 1776, did not remain a tiny circle for long. Adam Weishaupt knew that ideas, no matter how powerful, could not alter the world unless they were carried on the tongues and shoulders of men in positions of influence. The order's survival depended on growth, and growth required careful recruitment. From its earliest days, expansion was less about numbers and more about strategy. Every new member was a potential weapon, a seed planted in fertile soil, ready to sprout into influence within government, academia, or the church. For Weishaupt, expansion was not just a goal, it was the very lifeblood of the Illuminati's dark design. In the beginning, the order circle was made up of students, young, idealistic men drawn to the promise of hidden knowledge and a higher cause. But Weishaupt quickly realized that mere scholars, though useful, lacked the reach to alter society in any meaningful way. If the Illuminati was to challenge the thrones and altars of Europe, it needed men with power, prestige, and access. Recruitment, therefore, was no random affair. It was targeted, deliberate, a chess game in which each pawn, knight, or bishop was carefully chosen for the influence they could exert. Prospective members were watched, tested, and courted. Only those who displayed intelligence, ambition, and discontent with the current order were invited into the fold. At the heart of this expansion was manipulation. Novices, eager to prove themselves, were instructed to seek out potential recruits within their own circles, friends, colleagues, acquaintances who might be sympathetic to the cause. But the process was cloaked in subtlety. A candidate was never approached directly. Instead, they were slowly tested through conversation, exposed to radical ideas in increments, and assessed for loyalty and discretion. If they showed promise, they were brought to the threshold of initiation. If they faltered, they were quietly discarded, none the wiser to how close they had come to the forbidden brotherhood. This method ensured not only secrecy but quality. Only the most malleable, the most driven, and the most trustworthy were allowed to enter. It was during these years of expansion that the Illuminati gained one of its most important members, Adolf Freiherr Kaniger. Kaniger was a charismatic nobleman, a man of charm, eloquence, and immense organizational skill. Unlike the students and scholars who formed the early Illuminati, Kaniger brought with him both social standing and connections to the wider world of secret societies. Where Weishaupt was a stern professor, Kaniger was a diplomat and a recruiter, capable of winning men over with persuasion rather than fear. He recognized the order's potential but also saw its limitations. Under his influence, the Illuminati's system of ranks and rituals was refined, borrowing more heavily from Freemasonry to create a structure that was both alluring and disciplined. With Kaniger's help, the order transformed from a small circle of dreamers into a network capable of real expansion. Through Kaniger's efforts, the Illuminati spread far beyond the confines of Ingolstadt. Lodges in Munich, Frankfurt, and Vienna became infiltrated with Illuminati influence. Members of Masonic lodges, already accustomed to secrecy and ritual, proved especially vulnerable. To them, the Illuminati appeared as a natural extension of their own pursuits, a society that offered greater purpose and deeper knowledge. By the early 1780s, entire lodges had been brought under Illuminati control, their members converted into soldiers of Weishaupt's cause without fully realizing the extent of their obedience. The order was no longer confined to Bavaria. It was reaching into the very fabric of European intellectual and political life. The Illuminati's growth was not simply a matter of numbers but of infiltration. Professors recruited their brightest students, nobles brought in their peers, and clergymen, ironically enough, sometimes found themselves drawn to the order's promise of reason and enlightenment. Each recruit became a node in an expanding web, quietly influencing the circles in which they moved. A single Illuminatus in a royal court could whisper ideas into the ear of a prince. A member in a university could shape the minds of future leaders. Even the lower ranks, though unaware of the order's full scope, served as eager propagators of Enlightenment ideals disguised as casual conversation. The strategy was brilliant in its subtlety. Revolution not through open rebellion, but through quiet infection. But this growth came with costs. The order's secrecy, once its shield, began to foster paranoia. Members were instructed to report on one another, submitting accounts of their behavior and loyalty. Reports flowed upward to Weishaupt, who dissected them with clinical detachment. Trust was rationed, suspicion encouraged. The order's hierarchy became a labyrinth of hidden intentions, where even devoted members could never be certain of who they served or how much of the truth they knew. This atmosphere of control ensured loyalty, but it also sowed seeds of discontent. Some members, particularly those from noble backgrounds, bristled at Weishaupt's authoritarian grip. Others feared the consequences if their involvement were discovered by the church or the state. Still, the promise of hidden power kept most from walking away. By the early 1780s, estimates suggest that the Illuminati boasted several hundred members, possibly even into the low thousands, though precise numbers are impossible to confirm. Their ranks included professors, judges, politicians, military officers, and aristocrats. For an order that had begun with only a handful of students, this was an astonishing rise. But with growth came exposure. Whispers of the Illuminati began to circulate, not only among those who opposed Enlightenment thought but even among the order's supposed allies. The secrecy that once protected them now provoked suspicion. What was this hidden society plotting in the shadows? Were they simply philosophers in disguise, or was there something far more sinister at work? The truth was more complex. While many members believed they were working toward the noble aims of freedom and reason, Weishaupt and his inner circle harbored deeper ambitions. They spoke of dismantling monarchy, weakening the power of the church, and reshaping society according to their vision of rational governance. To accomplish this, they did not simply seek to influence, they sought to control. Expansion was never merely about spreading ideas, it was about embedding the order in every corner of power until no decision could be made without their hidden hand guiding it. In this sense, every new member was not only a convert but a tool, a piece in a vast and unfolding strategy. The Illuminati's expansion in these years is perhaps the most chilling phase of its existence. It reveals the dual nature of the order. On the surface, a brotherhood dedicated to enlightenment and progress. Beneath, a machine of secrecy, manipulation, and ambition. For those who joined, the order offered belonging, purpose, and the intoxicating sense of being part of something larger than themselves. But for Weishaupt and his closest allies, recruitment was never about the individual, it was about the agenda. Minds were chains to be unlocked, yes, but also to be harnessed, directed toward ends that only a select few could see. By the time the Illuminati reached its height, it had become something more than a society. It was a shadow network stretching across borders, embedded in institutions of learning, government, and influence. It had grown far beyond what its founder might have imagined on that May Day of 1776. And yet, its very success was also its undoing. With expansion came attention, with influence came scrutiny, and with secrecy came suspicion. The more it spread, the closer it drew to the gaze of those who would not tolerate its existence. But in this moment, in the height of its growth, the Illuminati was a force unlike any other in Europe, a brotherhood that whispered in the ears of the powerful and dreamed of reshaping the world in silence. The doctrines of the Illuminati were wrapped in the language of freedom, equality, and enlightenment, but beneath their elegant words lay a far more complex and unsettling agenda. At first glance, the order's mission seemed noble, even revolutionary for its time. Adam Weishaupt wrote of freeing mankind from superstition, tearing down the chains of blind faith, and building a society governed by reason rather than fear. To his recruits, these ideas sounded like the dawn of a new age, a chance to break free from the suffocating grip of monarchy and church. Yet when examined more closely, the Illuminati's doctrines reveal themselves to be less about liberation and more about control, less about truth and more about manipulation. Their creed was not merely philosophy, it was strategy. At the heart of the Illuminati's ideology was a simple but powerful belief: the masses could not be trusted with freedom. Ordinary men and women, Weishaupt argued, were too ignorant, too bound by superstition, too easily swayed by passion and fear to govern themselves wisely. Left unchecked, they would simply replace one form of tyranny with another. If the world was to change, it could not be through open rebellion or democratic experiment. Instead, it required a hidden elite, enlightened men who could steer society from the shadows, guiding humanity toward progress without ever revealing their hand. This was the central paradox of the Illuminati, preaching liberty while demanding absolute obedience, promising equality while constructing a rigid hierarchy. To achieve this vision, the order developed doctrines that blended Enlightenment ideals with techniques of control. Members were taught to believe in reason, knowledge, and the rejection of superstition. They were instructed to question authority, to resist the influence of the church, and to challenge the arbitrary power of kings. Yet at the same time, they were commanded to submit themselves entirely to the order. Individual thought was praised, but only insofar as it served the collective mission. Every novice was stripped of his independence, molded into a soldier of reason who owed loyalty not to God or king, but to the brotherhood. The irony was stark. To be truly free, one had to surrender freedom to the order. The Illuminati's doctrines also placed heavy emphasis on secrecy and infiltration. They believed that the structures of power could not be destroyed through direct assault, but had to be hollowed out from within. Members were encouraged to infiltrate institutions, universities, governments, churches, and especially Masonic lodges. Once inside, they were to spread the seeds of Enlightenment thought, slowly bending these institutions to the will of the order. The strategy was as patient as it was insidious. Rather than declaring war on monarchy and church, the Illuminati aimed to weaken them gradually, eroding authority from within until collapse became inevitable. Control of information was another pillar of their doctrine. Knowledge was power, and within the Illuminati, knowledge was carefully rationed. A novice was told only what he needed to know. Higher truths, deeper teachings, and the order's ultimate goals were revealed only as a member rose through the ranks. This system of graded revelation kept initiates hungry, obedient, and loyal. They believed that greater wisdom awaited them just beyond the next initiation, unaware that even the highest degrees often concealed as much as they revealed. In this way, Weishaupt and his inner circle maintained absolute control. Members thought they were rising toward enlightenment, when in truth, they were climbing deeper into a labyrinth designed by their master. Perhaps the most controversial aspect of the Illuminati's doctrine was its attitude toward religion. To Weishaupt, organized religion was nothing more than superstition weaponized for control. The Church, he argued, had enslaved humanity with fear of divine punishment, keeping men docile while enriching itself with power and wealth. In Illuminati doctrine, religion was an enemy to be dismantled. Members were urged to undermine clerical authority, to ridicule superstition, and to promote secular education in its place. Yet the Illuminati did not reject ritual altogether. In fact, they borrowed heavily from the very religious traditions they despised, cloaking themselves in oaths, symbols, and ceremonies designed to inspire awe. It was a deliberate paradox: strip away faith, but replace it with loyalty to the order. In doing so, they created their own form of religion, one where the god was reason, and the priests were Illuminati themselves. The political ambitions of the Illuminati were equally radical. Their writings hinted at the eventual overthrow of monarchy, the dismantling of hereditary privilege, and the creation of a society based on merit and equality. Yet here again, contradiction reigned. While they spoke of equality, their system was hierarchical and authoritarian. While they claimed to fight tyranny, they imposed strict obedience on their own members. The vision they offered was not one of democracy or open debate, but of an invisible dictatorship of the enlightened. For Weishaupt and his inner circle, true equality meant all men bowing before the judgment of those few deemed worthy to guide humanity. To outsiders, these doctrines would have seemed dangerously subversive. In a deeply Catholic Bavaria, to suggest dismantling the church was heresy. To whisper of overthrowing monarchy was treason. Even among other Enlightenment thinkers, the Illuminati's methods seemed extreme. Voltaire and Rousseau might have criticized religion and monarchy, but they did so in books and salons, in the open marketplace of ideas. Weishaupt and his disciples, by contrast, sought to burrow into society like parasites, changing it from within. Their philosophy was not just radical, it was clandestine by design, meant to thrive in the dark and dissolve in the light. Yet to their members, the doctrines were intoxicating. Imagine being a young man in 18th century Bavaria, frustrated by the restrictions of church and state, suffocated by tradition. To be invited into a secret brotherhood that promised not only knowledge but the power to change the world would have been irresistible. The doctrines gave meaning, direction, and belonging. They offered the illusion of equality, the thrill of secrecy, and the promise of shaping the future. Many recruits believe wholeheartedly that they were fighting for the liberation of mankind, unaware that they were also pawns in Weishaupt's larger scheme. This dual nature, the blend of idealism and manipulation, made the Illuminati's doctrines both powerful and dangerous. They spoke to humanity's highest aspirations while exploiting its deepest weaknesses. They promised light but thrived in shadow. They preached reason but demanded obedience. They condemned tyranny while practicing it. It was a doctrine designed not just to inspire, but to control, not just to liberate, but to dominate. By the early 1780s, as the Illuminati grew in number and influence, their doctrines became both their greatest strength and their greatest liability. To sympathizers, they represented the cutting edge of Enlightenment thought, a daring experiment in human progress. To enemies, they were a subversive cult plotting the destruction of society. In truth, they were both, and perhaps that is why their legend endures. The Illuminati was never simply about philosophy or politics. It was about the seductive, terrifying possibility that a small group of men could reshape the world in silence. Their dark agenda was not written on banners or shouted in the streets. It was whispered in the ears of those who held power, passed like a secret flame from one initiate to the next. And that flame, once lit, would prove almost impossible to extinguish. The Illuminati's rise did not go unnoticed by the most powerful institution in Bavaria, the Catholic Church. For centuries, the Church had been more than a religious authority. It was the very backbone of Bavarian society, shaping laws, education, morality, and even the rhythms of daily life. Its power extended far beyond the pulpit. Priests controlled schools, monks dictated what could be read, and bishops advised rulers on matters of governance. To challenge the Church was to challenge the very heart of Bavarian identity. Yet this was exactly what the Illuminati intended. Their doctrines, built on reason and liberation from superstition, placed them on a collision course with the Catholic hierarchy. It was a war not fought with armies, but with ideas, secrecy, and whispers, a shadow war that would leave scars across Europe. From the Church's perspective, the Illuminati were more than just another secret society. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other clandestine groups were already well known, and while the Church disapproved of them, these organizations were often tolerated as eccentric fraternities with limited influence. But the Illuminati were different. They weren't content to gather for rituals and idle talk. They sought to infiltrate the Church itself, to undermine its authority from within, and to replace faith with reason. Priests who joined the order, or even sympathized with its ideals, were instructed to sow doubt in their congregations, to ridicule superstition subtly, and to promote secular education. To the Church, this was not harmless, it was poison. Adam Weishaupt and his inner circle understood the power of religion and targeted it deliberately. In their writings, they referred to Christianity as a tool of oppression, a system designed to keep humanity shackled in ignorance. They taught their initiates that priests thrived on fear, fear of hell, fear of damnation, fear of the unknown, and that to free mankind, these fears had to be dismantled. Yet at the same time, the Illuminati borrowed heavily from the very rituals they despised. Their initiations echoed religious ceremonies, their oaths resembled sacred vows, and their hierarchy mirrored ecclesiastical structure. It was as though they sought not to abolish religion but to replace it, with the order itself as the new church, and reason as its god. This paradox made them all the more threatening to Catholic leaders. By the early 1780s, rumors of the Illuminati began to circulate more widely. Preachers denounced them from the pulpit, warning congregations of a godless sect plotting in darkness. Some accused them of satanic ties, claiming their rejection of religion was proof of allegiance to the devil. Others spread stories of blasphemous rituals, of initiates swearing oaths over desecrated crosses or mocking the sacraments. Though much of this was propaganda, it found fertile ground among ordinary Bavarians, who viewed the Illuminati with suspicion and fear. The Church's greatest weapon was not reasoned argument but fear of heresy, and it wielded this weapon with devastating effect. The Illuminati, for their part, responded with subtle defiance. Members who held academic or clerical positions began pushing for reforms in education, arguing that schools should focus on science, philosophy, and history rather than theology. Some advocated for reduced church influence in civic matters, insisting that morality could be guided by reason rather than scripture. In secret writings, Weishaupt called for nothing less than the dismantling of the priesthood altogether. He believed that once religion was weakened, humanity would naturally gravitate toward the rational society envisioned by the order. These ambitions, once whispered only in small circles, began to attract attention at higher levels of church and government. The battle lines were drawn. Elector Karl Theodor, ruler of Bavaria, found himself under increasing pressure from the church to act. To tolerate secret societies was one thing, but to allow a brotherhood actively undermining the church was another. Reports reached him of Illuminati influence spreading into universities, lodges, and even among members of his own administration. The thought that an invisible hand might be steering his government, eroding the authority of both crown and cross, was intolerable. The church framed the order not simply as dissenters, but as conspirators plotting to overthrow the very fabric of society. For Karl Theodor, who relied heavily on the support of the clergy, the Illuminati became a threat too dangerous to ignore. The church's offensive grew more aggressive. Pamphlets denouncing the Illuminati flooded Bavaria, painting lurid pictures of their alleged depravity. Preachers thundered against them in sermons, warning that eternal damnation awaited those who dabbled in their philosophies. Confessionals became places of interrogation, where whispers of membership could ruin reputations or worse. Fear spread, and with fear came betrayal. Friends turned on one another, colleagues reported suspicious behavior, and entire communities grew suspicious of intellectuals who dared to question orthodoxy. The Church was fighting not just the Illuminati, but the very spirit of enlightenment, branding reason itself as a threat to faith. For the Illuminati, the pressure was immense. Their strategy of secrecy, once their greatest strength, now made them vulnerable. Rumors and paranoia filled the gaps where truth was absent, and the less the public knew, the more monstrous the order seemed. Weishaupt insisted that his followers remain steadfast, that persecution was proof of their righteousness. Yet even within the order, cracks began to appear. Some members, especially those in clerical or noble positions, feared exposure. Others questioned whether the order's radical stance against religion had gone too far, drawing unnecessary attention. The shadow war with the Church was no longer an intellectual battle, it was a fight for survival. The irony of this conflict is that both sides mirrored one another more than they cared to admit. The Church demanded obedience, secrecy, and loyalty to a higher power. The Illuminati demanded the same, cloaked in the rhetoric of reason. Both claimed to hold the keys to truth, both sought to guide humanity according to their vision, and both saw the other as an existential threat. In many ways, the war between the Illuminati and the Church was less about faith versus reason and more about authority versus authority. Two rival powers vying for control of the same souls. By the mid-1780s, the Church had succeeded in convincing the Bavarian government to outlaw secret societies, a decree aimed squarely at the Illuminati. The order, once growing boldly in the shadows, now found itself hunted. Raids uncovered documents that revealed their inner workings, exposing names, rituals, and ambitions to the public. To the Church, this was vindication, proof of the order's subversive nature. To the Illuminati, it was betrayal from within, evidence that secrecy could not protect them forever. The shadow war had become an open purge. Yet despite these setbacks, the battle between the Illuminati and the Church never truly ended. While the order crumbled under pressure, its ideas did not die. Enlightenment thought continued to spread, challenging religious authority across Europe. The Church, though victorious in Bavaria, could not extinguish the spirit of rebellion it had sought to crush. And the Illuminati, though scattered, lived on in rumor, myth, and suspicion, becoming a symbol of the eternal struggle between faith and reason, control and freedom. The shadow war with the Church was not simply a chapter in the Illuminati's history, it was the crucible that defined them. It transformed them from a secret society into a legend, a force whispered about in fear and fascination for centuries to come. The Church may have struck the decisive blow, but in doing so, it ensured that the Illuminati's name would never be forgotten. For in the darkness of that conflict, the myth of the Illuminati took root, destined to grow far larger than the men who had once gathered in secrecy on that May Day in 1776. The unraveling of the Bavarian Illuminati was as dramatic as its rise, a tale of ambition colliding with suspicion, secrecy undone by exposure, and an order that once dreamed of reshaping the world brought low by the very forces it sought to undermine. By the mid-1780s, the Illuminati had reached its zenith. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of members were scattered across Bavaria and beyond, their network extending into universities, courts, and Masonic lodges. To Adam Weishaupt, it seemed that his vision of a hidden brotherhood guiding humanity toward reason was finally within reach. Yet in truth, the order's very success had sown the seeds of its destruction. The Illuminati had grown too large, too ambitious, and too visible. In a land where the Catholic Church and the monarchy tolerated no rivals, their days were numbered. The first cracks began to show in 1784, when Elector Karl Theodor of Bavaria, pressured by the Church, issued a decree banning all secret societies. The measure was aimed not only at the Illuminati but at Freemasons and other groups as well. But everyone understood the real target, Weishaupt's creation. For years, rumors of the Illuminati had circulated, whispers of plots against throne and altar, of godless men manipulating governments and universities. The decree gave these whispers the weight of law. Overnight, membership in the order became dangerous, punishable by fines, imprisonment, or exile. What had once been a badge of hidden prestige now marked men as traitors in waiting. At first, the Illuminati tried to resist. Weishaupt urged his followers to remain steadfast, insisting that secrecy would protect them. But secrecy is fragile, and paranoia eats away at loyalty. Under pressure, members began to falter. Some distanced themselves quietly, fading back into the safety of ordinary life. Others, fearing discovery, betrayed their brothers, revealing names and secrets to the authorities in exchange for leniency. The very system of surveillance that Weishaupt had imposed, requiring members to report on one another, now worked against him. Documents were seized, correspondence intercepted, and hidden plans exposed. The shadowy order was dragged into the light, and what emerged was shocking. Raids conducted in 1786 on the homes of suspected Illuminati members uncovered troves of papers, initiation rituals, coded instructions, lists of recruits, and outlines of the order's long-term ambitions. Among the documents were writings that explicitly denounced monarchy and religion, detailing plans to infiltrate schools, courts, and churches. For the Bavarian authorities, this was confirmation of their worst fears. The Illuminati were not merely a debating society or harmless fraternity. They were conspirators plotting to overthrow the established order. Whether these documents reflected genuine intentions or exaggerated fantasies of power mattered little. To rulers and clergy, the evidence was damning enough. The revelations sent shockwaves across Bavaria and beyond. Pamphlets were printed and distributed widely, exposing the Illuminati's inner workings to the public. Tales of their blasphemous oaths, their plans to dismantle church and state, and their infiltration of Freemasonry spread like wildfire. Some accounts were exaggerated, others fabricated entirely, but together they created a picture of a sinister cabal lurking in the shadows, manipulating events from behind the curtain. Ordinary citizens, already primed by years of clerical warnings, saw in these revelations proof that the Illuminati were agents of chaos, enemies of God, and architects of revolution. Fear became hysteria, and hysteria demanded blood. Weishaupt himself became a hunted man. Forced to flee Ingolstadt, he disguised himself and moved from place to place, seeking refuge among sympathetic nobles and allies. His writings, once carefully guarded, were now used against him, twisted into evidence of treason. Stripped of his professorship, denounced by the government, and abandoned by many of his followers, the once powerful Spartacus of the Illuminati was reduced to a fugitive. For years, he wandered Europe, continuing to write in defense of his order, but his influence had collapsed. Without its architect, the Illuminati fractured, splintering into scattered remnants. By 1787, the Bavarian government issued even harsher edicts, making participation in the Illuminati punishable by death. This final blow shattered whatever remained of the order. Many members renounced their ties, others disappeared, and still others clung to the hope that the order might survive underground. But in Bavaria, at least, the Illuminati was finished. What had begun as a bold experiment in Enlightenment ideals cloaked in secrecy ended in disgrace, persecution, and collapse. Yet the end of the Illuminati's open existence marked the beginning of its myth. The very act of suppression gave the order a mystique it could never have achieved on its own. Banning the Illuminati did not erase it from memory. It immortalized it as something too dangerous to be tolerated. If they had truly been destroyed, skeptics asked, why did rulers still fear their influence? If their documents had been exaggerated, why did authorities work so hard to silence them? The unanswered questions gave birth to speculation, and speculation grew into legend. Outside Bavaria, the Illuminati's supposed influence became a convenient explanation for unrest and revolution. In France, as the monarchy teetered on the brink of collapse, conservatives claimed that Illuminati agents had orchestrated the revolution, spreading radical ideas to fuel rebellion. In America, whispers suggested that the same hidden hand behind Europe's turmoil had crossed the Atlantic, seeking to subvert the young republic. From pulpits to parliaments, the name Illuminati became synonymous with conspiracy, manipulation, and unseen power. Ironically, the order that had collapsed in failure now wielded greater influence in rumor than it ever had in reality. The Illuminati's fall also revealed the fragility of secrecy as a weapon. For all its oaths, ciphers, and rituals, the order could not protect itself from human weakness. Ambition bred betrayal, fear bred confessions, and secrecy bred suspicion. What was meant to be a disciplined machine of influence became a house of cards, collapsing at the first gust of exposure. Yet in collapse, it achieved something extraordinary: immortality in myth. Adam Weishaupt lived until 1830, long after his order had been destroyed. In exile, he continued to write, defending his vision and insisting that the Illuminati's true aims had been misunderstood. He claimed they sought not tyranny, but enlightenment, not destruction, but reform. Few listened. To the public, the Illuminati was already something far more powerful than a circle of philosophers. It was a symbol of hidden control, of the terrifying possibility that the world was not guided by kings or priests, but by invisible men in shadow. Thus, the fall of the Illuminati was not an end but a transformation. Stripped of its institutions and scattered by persecution, the order ceased to exist as a functioning society. Yet in the imagination of Europe, it grew larger than life. Its documents, seized and publicized, became proof of its dark agenda. Its secrecy, once its shield, became the foundation of suspicion. And its destruction, rather than erasing it, ensured that the Illuminati would live on, not as flesh and blood, but as legend. The exposure, the bans, the purges, these were the instruments of the Illuminati's death. But they were also the crucible in which its myth was forged, a myth that would spread across continents and centuries. In the end, the Illuminati achieved the immortality it had sought, not by controlling governments or toppling kings, but by haunting history itself. When the Bavarian Illuminati was officially dismantled in the late 1780s, it might have seemed like the story had ended. Its members were scattered, its founder disgraced, its documents seized and exposed to public ridicule. Yet in truth, this was only the beginning. Though the order itself ceased to exist as an organized society, the idea of the Illuminati began to take on a life of its own, an invisible afterlife more powerful than anything Adam Weishaupt could have orchestrated. What had been a small secret fraternity in Bavaria transformed into a global spectre, blamed for revolutions, wars, and social upheavals. In death, the Illuminati became immortal, a ghost whispered about in corridors of power and in the homes of ordinary people alike. The seeds of this transformation were sown in the very manner of the order's collapse. When Bavarian authorities raided Illuminati members' homes and published their private writings, they intended to discredit the group. Instead, they inadvertently spread its ideas far beyond its former reach. The sensational revelations about infiltration, oaths of loyalty, and plans to undermine monarchy and religion captured the imagination of Europe. Even as governments denounced the order, they kept its name alive, repeating it in edicts, pamphlets, and sermons. In the eyes of the public, the Illuminati ceased to be a fringe circle of radicals and became a mysterious cabal with seemingly limitless influence. In the years that followed, Europe descended into chaos. The French Revolution erupted in 1789, just 2 years after Bavaria outlawed the Illuminati. Streets in Paris ran red with blood as monarchs were overthrown and guillotines claimed the lives of kings and queens. To many observers, this was no coincidence. Conservative writers and clerics declared that the Illuminati had orchestrated the revolution from behind the scenes, planting its doctrines of liberty and equality among the French people, then pulling the strings as the old order collapsed. Pamphlets and books appeared across Europe warning that the Illuminati was still alive, spreading radicalism, undermining governments, and seeking to plunge the world into an age of anarchy. Among the most influential voices was Augustin Barruel, a French Jesuit who in 1797 published a multi-volume work, Memoirs illustrating the history of Jacobinism. Barruel argued that the French Revolution was not a spontaneous uprising of the people but the calculated work of secret societies, with the Illuminati at the center. He portrayed them as puppet masters who had infiltrated Freemasonry, corrupted intellectuals, and unleashed chaos upon Europe. Around the same time, Scottish professor John Robison published proofs of a conspiracy, echoing Barruel's warnings and accusing the Illuminati of seeking to dominate the entire globe. These works cemented the idea that the order had not died but had gone underground, spreading its influence like a shadowy contagion. The notion of an invisible Illuminati directing revolutions resonated deeply with those who feared the collapse of traditional authority. Monarchs, clergy, and conservatives found in the Illuminati a convenient scapegoat. Rather than admit that corruption, inequality, and oppression had driven people to revolt, they insisted that dark forces were at work. The Illuminati became the perfect villain, faceless, elusive, and impossible to disprove. Every upheaval, every assassination, every rebellion could be traced back to their unseen hand. And because the order no longer officially existed, its survival could always be claimed without evidence. Even across the Atlantic, the Illuminati's ghost cast a long shadow. In the early years of the United States, whispers spread that the same hidden hand behind the French Revolution had infiltrated America. Ministers warned congregations that Illuminati agents were working to undermine the Republic, eroding faith, and corrupting morals. In 1798, a pastor named Jedediah Morse, father of Samuel Morse, the inventor of the telegraph, delivered sermons claiming that the Illuminati had embedded itself in American political life. Pamphlets circulated, warning of conspiracies to destroy Christianity and replace it with atheistic reason. Though no evidence was ever found, the suspicion lingered, demonstrating how quickly the myth had crossed oceans. What made the Illuminati myth so powerful was its adaptability. To some, it represented the radical left, overthrowing kings and priests in the name of equality. To others, it represented a global elite manipulating revolutions to tighten their grip on power. The Illuminati could be painted as atheist heretics or as power-hungry oligarchs, as liberators or tyrants, as revolutionaries or monarchists in disguise. Their ghost became a blank canvas onto which every fear could be projected. Because they were invisible, they could be imagined as omnipresent. Because they were silent, they could be accused of saying anything. By the turn of the 19th century, the Illuminati had become less a historical organization and more a symbol of conspiracy itself. Whenever people struggled to understand complex upheavals, wars, revolutions, economic crises, they looked to the idea of a hidden order controlling events. In this way, the Illuminati myth became self-perpetuating. Every time a conspiracy was uncovered, the Illuminati was invoked. Every time chaos struck, their name was whispered. And because secrecy had been the very foundation of their identity, their absence became proof of their presence. If no evidence could be found, that only meant they had covered their tracks. Even as time passed and Europe stabilized, the legend refused to die. Political opponents accused one another of being Illuminati sympathizers. Clergymen warned of their influence in corrupting youth. Rulers used their name to justify censorship, surveillance, and crackdowns on dissent. The Illuminati had become a phantom enemy, a ghost summoned whenever those in power needed to explain unrest or suppress opposition. Ironically, Adam Weishaupt's dream of guiding humanity from the shadows had been realized in a way he never intended. The Illuminati no longer needed to exist. The fear of them was enough to shape the world. The most chilling aspect of this ghostly survival was how it fed on secrecy itself. Because the Illuminati was invisible, it could never truly be disproven. Each failed revolution, each radical pamphlet, each act of violence could be linked to them, even without evidence. The more they were denied, the more certain people became that they were real. They had become less an organization and more an idea, a story of hidden power that explained the chaos of an uncertain world. By the early 1800s, the Bavarian Illuminati was long dead as a formal order. Adam Weishaupt lived in exile, writing defenses of his creation, insisting it had been misunderstood. But his words could not erase the myth. The Illuminati had slipped beyond his control, becoming a legend far greater than any secret society he could have built. What began as a handful of men in Bavaria had become a global phantom, accused of pulling strings across continents and centuries. The seeds of conspiracy had been planted, and they would never be uprooted. The Illuminati had become the archetype of the secret cabal, the eternal ghost that haunts history whenever humanity seeks a hidden hand behind events. In their destruction, they achieved a strange immortality. Their name no longer belonged to Weishaupt or Bavaria or the Enlightenment. It belonged to the world, to fear, and to imagination. And once a ghost takes root in the human mind, it can never truly die. By the dawn of the 19th century, the Illuminati had already slipped the chains of history and entered the realm of legend. No longer merely the suppressed order of Adam Weishaupt, they had become a symbol, a name whispered whenever unseen forces were suspected of shaping human affairs. But while the 18th century birthed the Illuminati myth in the fires of revolution, it was the centuries that followed that kept the flame alive, reshaping it, adapting it, and embedding it into culture in ways Weishaupt himself could never have imagined. What began as accusations of secret plots against kings and priests would evolve into one of the most enduring cultural myths of all time, linking the Illuminati not only to revolutions and governments but eventually to pop stars, corporations, and the very fabric of modern life. In the 19th century, the Illuminati was invoked whenever fear of hidden control took root. Across Europe, as monarchies struggled to maintain order and new political ideologies emerged, the spectre of the Illuminati was never far from sight. Conservative voices accused liberals and revolutionaries of being agents of the order, while radicals sometimes embraced the label ironically, wearing it as proof of their subversive courage. Secret societies proliferated, from the Carbonari in Italy to revolutionary groups across Eastern Europe. And even though most of these had no connection to Weishaupt's creation, the Illuminati's ghost hovered over them all. It was as if the very concept of a clandestine force pulling strings had been permanently branded with the name Illuminati. By the 20th century, the myth had taken on new life in the context of global wars, financial collapses, and the rise of modern mass media. The devastation of World War I, with its seemingly inexplicable carnage and the collapse of empires, gave fuel to conspiracy theorists who claimed that secret elites, sometimes specifically the Illuminati, had engineered the conflict for profit or power. After World War II, as the Cold War cast the world into paranoia, the Illuminati myth fused with fears of communism, capitalism, and nuclear annihilation. Depending on who told the story, the Illuminati were either capitalist bankers plotting global domination, communist revolutionaries working to enslave humanity, or an invisible alliance of both, manipulating the great powers from behind the scenes. This adaptability is part of what made the Illuminati myth so enduring. It was never bound to a single ideology. Instead, it was a mirror for fear, reflecting whatever people most dreaded in their own age. In the 1960s and 70s, as counterculture movements challenged authority, conspiracy literature blossomed. Books like Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson's The Illuminatus trilogy blended satire, philosophy, and science fiction to paint the Illuminati as both terrifying and absurd. In this psychedelic retelling, the Illuminati became less a concrete society and more a symbol of the chaos and absurdity of hidden power itself. Ironically, by parodying the conspiracy, the authors only deepened its cultural resonance, cementing the Illuminati as a household word. The late 20th century saw the Illuminati myth intertwine with another rising paranoia, the New World Order. In the 1980s and 90s, as globalization expanded and governments grew increasingly intertwined, fears of a single world government spread. Politicians, bankers, and international organizations like the United Nations were accused of being pawns in an Illuminati scheme to enslave humanity under a single global system. Right-wing radio hosts, conspiracy pamphlets, and underground newsletters painted vivid pictures of hidden cabals planning to abolish national sovereignty, control currency, and microchip the population. Once again, the Illuminati became the perfect villain, faceless, omnipresent, and impossible to disprove. But it was in the 21st century that the Illuminati truly transcended politics and entered the bloodstream of popular culture. With the rise of the internet, social media, and global entertainment, the Illuminati became a meme, a joke, a symbol, and a serious accusation all at once. Pop stars and celebrities were accused of belonging to the order, their every gesture scrutinized for hidden meaning. A triangular hand sign during a music video became proof of allegiance. Lyrics about power or mystery were interpreted as Illuminati codes. Beyoncé, Jay-Z, Rihanna, Kanye West, all became targets of online speculation that they were agents of the Illuminati, spreading influence through music and media. The all-seeing eye, once a Masonic and Enlightenment symbol, now appeared on dollar bills, album covers, and YouTube thumbnails, endlessly recycled as evidence of secret control. This cultural evolution reveals the peculiar power of the Illuminati myth. It thrives in ambiguity. In the 18th century, its secrecy was its strength, but in the 21st century, its vagueness serves the same purpose. The Illuminati can mean anything to anyone. To some, it is a satanic cult corrupting youth through entertainment. To others, it is a cabal of bankers and politicians engineering wars. To many, it is little more than a joke, a shorthand for hidden power, invoked ironically in memes and internet jokes about lizards, UFOs, and shadow governments. The line between parody and belief blurs, and the Illuminati exists simultaneously as cultural satire and genuine conspiracy. What makes this especially powerful is the role of fear and distrust in modern society. In a world where governments lie, corporations exploit, and technology erodes privacy, the idea of hidden rulers does not seem entirely absurd. The Illuminati myth offers a simple explanation for complex problems. Wars are not the result of messy politics, but of secret design. Economic collapses are not accidents, but deliberate manipulations. Fame is not earned, but purchased with allegiance to shadow masters. In this sense, the Illuminati myth endures because it feeds a human need for clarity in chaos. It gives fear a name, and that name is endlessly adaptable. Popular culture has embraced this duality. Films, novels, and video games invoke the Illuminati as villains or puppet masters, often blending fact and fiction into a tapestry of intrigue. Hollywood blockbusters depict them as shadow councils steering history. Novels like Angels and Demons popularize them as ancient foes of religion. Even comedic shows parody their omnipresence, presenting them as bumbling conspirators behind every strange event. The myth has grown so large that it no longer requires believers to survive. It exists independently as a cultural archetype, a modern myth alongside vampires, aliens, and demons. In truth, the Illuminati of Weishaupt's Bavaria was short-lived and fragile, collapsing within a decade of its birth. Yet the Illuminati of popular culture is eternal, constantly reinvented for new generations. For some, it is entertainment. For others, it is a genuine explanation for the world's darkest mysteries. And for many, it is both, half believed, half mocked, but always present in the imagination. The Illuminati in popular culture is not the Illuminati that existed in 1776. It is larger, darker, and far more powerful than Weishaupt ever dreamed. It is a symbol of everything hidden, everything feared, everything unexplainable. From revolutions to music videos, from guillotines to memes, the Illuminati has embedded itself into the very fabric of cultural consciousness. And in that sense, perhaps they did succeed, not in controlling the world, but in haunting it forever. The Illuminati has always lived in the blurred space between fact and fiction, between what history records and what imagination insists upon. The truth of the order, that it was a small, secretive society founded by Adam Weishaupt in Bavaria in 1776, dismantled within a decade, seems almost mundane when compared to the monstrous shadow it has cast across centuries. Yet this very gap between reality and myth is where the Illuminati's dangerous allure resides. It is not what the order truly was that gives it power, but what people believe it might have been, or still could be. In that uncertainty, the Illuminati becomes more than history. It becomes a lens through which humanity views its fears, suspicions, and mistrust of authority. The truth, stripped of its embellishments, is straightforward. Weishaupt was an Enlightenment thinker frustrated by the grip of the Catholic Church and the stagnation of Freemasonry. He wanted to create a society that would spread reason, promote equality, and weaken superstition. His methods were secretive, authoritarian, and manipulative, but his aims were not entirely unique. Many groups at the time, radical philosophers, Masonic lodges, political clubs, sought similar goals. The Illuminati was different only in its strategy. It sought influence through infiltration, rather than open advocacy. For all its ambition, the order was fragile, undone by paranoia, betrayal, and government suppression. By the late 1780s, it was gone. That is the history, simple and finite. But myths rarely feed on simplicity. The Illuminati's true legacy is not its brief existence but the vast conspiracy theories it inspired. The myth thrives because it offers what reality does not: an explanation for chaos. Wars, revolutions, economic crises, these are messy, driven by countless causes and unpredictable human behavior. But if one believes in the Illuminati, then all this chaos is suddenly orderly, purposeful, and directed by a hidden hand. It transforms frightening uncertainty into a narrative. Humanity fears randomness more than tyranny, because tyranny can be fought, but chaos cannot. The Illuminati myth, therefore, is comforting even in its darkness. It suggests that someone, somewhere, is in control. This need for hidden villains is deeply psychological. Throughout history, societies have turned to conspiracies to explain upheaval. In medieval Europe, plagues were blamed on witches or Jews. In the early modern era, rebellions were said to be the work of satanic cults. By the 18th century, the Illuminati filled this role. They became the modern witch, the secular devil, a convenient scapegoat for forces too complex to understand. When the French Revolution erupted, many elites could not accept that ordinary men and women had risen against monarchy and inequality. It was easier to believe that a secret cabal had orchestrated the bloodshed. When revolutions shook Latin America, when strikes and protests swept across Europe, the Illuminati were accused once again. In each case, the myth explained what reality made unbearable, that people could rise up of their own accord. Yet the allure of the Illuminati is not only in blame but in fascination. Secret societies captivate the imagination because they represent forbidden knowledge. To join such a group is to cross a threshold, to enter a hidden world where truths are whispered that the rest of humanity can never hear. Even those who despise the Illuminati myth cannot help but be intrigued by it. Popular culture has exploited this endlessly, turning the order into villains, heroes, or shadowy puppet masters. The myth seduces because it promises that beneath the surface of history lies another story, a truer story, one reserved only for the initiated. In a world drowning in information, the idea of hidden truth is irresistible. But this allure is also dangerous. Conspiracies can erode trust, replacing rational understanding with paranoia. To believe in the Illuminati as a hidden global government is to see enemies everywhere, to doubt institutions, and to question even one's neighbors. Such beliefs can destabilize societies, turning political disagreement into suspicion of treason. In the modern world, conspiracy theories have real consequences, fueling violence, radicalization, and division. The Illuminati myth, with its centuries of evolution, provides a template for these modern conspiracies. It demonstrates how a small grain of truth can grow into a sprawling fiction that shapes behavior and politics for generations. And yet, To dismiss the myth entirely is to overlook why it persists. The Illuminati resonates because it reflects real truths about power. History is filled with secret meetings, backroom deals, and hidden agendas. Governments do lie. Elites do conspire. Wars have been started for profit, revolutions manipulated for gain, and people controlled through fear. The Illuminati myth survives not because it is factually accurate, but because it dramatizes these realities into a single, haunting symbol. It is less about the Bavarian order itself and more about the perennial suspicion that power is never what it seems. The paradox of the Illuminati, then, is that its power lies in ambiguity. If it were clearly real, it would be exposed and defeated. If it were clearly false, it would be forgotten. But because it exists in the twilight between fact and fiction, it thrives. Denial strengthens belief, because absence of evidence can be interpreted as proof of perfect secrecy. Exposure fuels the myth, because every revealed document seems to confirm hidden truths. The Illuminati is both dead and alive, both historical and eternal, both absurd and terrifying. That paradox ensures it will never vanish. In the end, the dangerous allure of the Illuminati lies not in what it was, but in what it represents. It is the embodiment of humanity's suspicion that we are not truly free, that unseen forces shape our lives without our knowledge. It is the story we tell ourselves when the world feels too chaotic, too unfair, too inexplicable. Whether as satire, symbol, or sincere belief, the Illuminati remains a mirror held up to human fear and fascination. Adam Weishaupt dreamed of guiding humanity in secret, of pulling strings from behind the curtain. He failed in his lifetime, but in myth, he succeeded beyond measure. His Illuminati may have collapsed in Bavaria, but the legend it birthed has become immortal. And perhaps that is the final, unsettling truth. The Illuminati does not need to exist to control us. The belief in them is enough. The story of the Bavarian Illuminati begins with a handful of men in a quiet Bavarian room in 1776 and ends, at least officially, with edicts, raids, and suppression a little more than a decade later. On the surface, it appears to be a short-lived experiment, an Enlightenment society that burned brightly for a moment and then collapsed under the weight of its own ambition. But the true legacy of the Illuminati cannot be measured in years or members or documents. Its true legacy is the shadow it cast, and still casts, over human imagination. Long after Adam Weishaupt died in exile, long after Bavaria outlawed secret societies, the name of the Illuminati endured, transformed into a symbol of hidden power, whispered conspiracies, and eternal suspicion. In death, it became something larger than life, a myth that refuses to die. The enduring fascination with the Illuminati stems from the simple fact that it inhabits the twilight zone between history and legend. Historians can point to documents, to laws, to names of members and founders. They can reconstruct the brief arc of the order's existence with clarity. Yet beyond those facts lies a fog where speculation thrives. Did the Illuminati truly orchestrate revolutions, as their enemies claimed? Did they survive suppression by going underground, quietly embedding themselves in governments and institutions? Or were they nothing more than a small fraternity inflated into a global menace by fear and propaganda? The inability to answer these questions with certainty is what keeps the Illuminati alive. In that uncertainty, their myth breathes. This ambiguity matters because it reflects something deeper about humanity's relationship with power. We want to believe that history is not random, that chaos does not govern the rise and fall of nations, that suffering and upheaval are not meaningless. Conspiracy provides order where there is disorder, purpose where there is confusion. To imagine the Illuminati pulling strings is to imagine that someone, anyone, is in control. And though that control may be sinister, it is preferable to the thought that no one is steering the course of history at all. This is the paradox of the Illuminati's allure. They terrify us, yet they comfort us, because they make the incomprehensible world comprehensible. The shadow of the Illuminati has also proven remarkably adaptable. In the 18th century, they were accused of plotting revolutions. In the 19th, they became a symbol of radical subversion. In the 20th, they were linked to world wars, financial empires, and the New World Order. And in the 21st, they are memes, pop culture references, and internet conspiracy fuel. In every age, the myth reshapes itself to reflect contemporary fears. That adaptability ensures survival. The Illuminati do not need temples, rituals, or members. They exist in the imagination, and in that space, they are eternal. But the danger of this myth should not be underestimated. To see the Illuminati everywhere is to live in perpetual suspicion. It is to doubt institutions, to to reject truth, to see hidden enemies behind every event. Conspiracy can inspire laughter, but it can also inspire violence. The same myths that turn into internet jokes also fuel radical movements convinced that unseen masters control their lives. The Illuminati, whether real or not, become a justification for hate, rebellion, and fear. The myth empowers those who would exploit paranoia for their own ends, just as much as it captivates those who seek entertainment in its mystery. And yet, to deny the Illuminati entirely is to ignore why their legend persists. The world is full of secrecy. Governments meet behind closed doors. Corporations manipulate markets. Intelligence agencies operate in shadows. History is littered with real conspiracies, assassinations, coups, cover-ups, that remind us hidden hands are not merely fantasy. The Illuminati myth endures because it resonates with these realities, because it amplifies the suspicion that power is always hidden, always greater than it appears. To dismiss it outright would be to dismiss the deep unease we feel when we realize how little control we truly have. The story of the Bavarian Illuminati, then, is not simply about a society that rose and fell in the 18th century. It is about the human need to explain the inexplicable, to find patterns in chaos, to name the shadows that haunt us. Adam Weishaupt wanted to guide humanity toward reason, but what he created instead was a myth that thrives on mystery. His order may have been destroyed, but the myth is indestructible. For centuries, it has adapted, evolved, and re-emerged in new forms. It has haunted revolutions, wars, and cultural shifts. It has crossed continents, leaped into art and entertainment, and embedded itself in our collective imagination. Perhaps the most haunting truth is this: the Illuminati no longer needs to exist in order to control us. Their power lies in belief itself. Each time their name is whispered, each time a symbol is spotted, each time a conspiracy unfolds online, the Illuminati's influence grows, not because they act, but because we imagine they act. They are not rulers of the world, but rulers of fear, and in that sense, they have achieved what Weishaupt once dreamed of, shaping humanity from the shadows. And so, the story closes as it began, in ambiguity and darkness. The Bavarian Illuminati of 1776 was a fragile society of men bound by secrecy. The Illuminati of today is a legend, a ghost, an eternal shadow. It is the reminder that history is not just what is written in books, but also what is whispered in fear, believed in silence, and passed down through centuries as rumor and suspicion. Whether they ever truly existed beyond those first years in Bavaria no longer matters. What matters is that we believe they might, and in that belief, the Illuminati will never die.